At this moment, the man who had just proposed was preparing to call the photographer to inquire about the shoot. A crossbow bolt whizzed through the air, striking him precisely in the forehead. The woman screamed in terror, but before she could react, a second crossbow bolt followed closely behind. Panicking, she turned and ran desperately toward the car. Just as she reached the vehicle, another bolt shot out, and she quickly ducked down. As she trembled and looked around, she was horrified to find the killer standing not far away, silently watching her. She no longer hesitated, quickly stood up and ran away. The woman sprinted frantically toward the vineyard, but tripped and fell. In an instant, a crossbow bolt hit her ankle. She gritted her teeth and continued to run recklessly, disregarding the pain. When she reached the winery, she collided with a security guard head-on. The terrified woman grabbed the security guard, thinking that he could save her. Screaming, she cried that someone was trying to kill her. However, before she could finish her sentence, the killer stepped into the winery. The guard immediately drew his gun, warning the intruder not to come any closer. However, the killer slowly pulled out a knife from his waist and threw it at the security guard. The woman was paralyzed with fear by this scene, and, without thinking, ran away once more. She hid in a press, curling up in a corner and holding her breath, terrified of being discovered. Time passed slowly, and the outside was eerily quiet. She began to think the killer had left and finally allowed her tense nerves to relax a bit. But just then, the machine's switch was activated. Ultimately, with nowhere to escape, the woman was crushed by the machine. According to news reports, over the past 2 years, a brutal, masked killer has appeared, dubbed Hard Eyes by police and the media. Every year on Valentine's Day, he appeared in different cities, specifically hunting couples. 2 years ago, he unleashed a bloody rampage in Boston, targeting mostly couples out on dates. Last year, he orchestrated an even larger-scale Valentine's Day massacre in Philadelphia, causing multiple deaths. The killer's methods were incredibly brutal. He would stalk his targets on Valentine's Day, lock onto his prey, and kill them mercilessly. The police still cannot confirm his identity, and it is difficult to predict his next move. However, it is clear that his primary targets are loving couples. Journalists have also emphasized that anyone who stands in his way will face ruthless murder. Now it is once again Valentine's Day, and the killer has resurfaced, having evidently arrived in Seattle. The police discovered 4 victims at the wine estate. For couples still planning to celebrate Valentine's Day, the police's advice was a simple 4-word warning: stay at home. At the scene, officers found a ring with the initials JS engraved on the inside. These letters did not match any of the victims' names, prompting police to suspect they were left by the killer. They attempted to analyze the killer's psychological profile. During the discussion, the team speculated several potential motives for the crime. Some believed that the killer might be a loner living in his mother's basement for a long time, a typical internet troll who chose to slaughter couples out of resentment. Another theory suggested that the killer could be a woman who had suffered emotional trauma. This person may be a girl who was never invited to the prom, or a person who was cheated on one too many times and finally had a mental breakdown. Meanwhile, the police obtained a crucial photograph. This photo was taken by the photographer just before he was murdered, and chillingly, the killer's figure appeared prominently in it. This evidence strengthened the police's belief that the killer was indeed in Seattle. With just 10 hours left until Valentine's Day, there was enough time for him to carry out more murders. Allie is an advertising strategist for a diamond company. She created an advertisement centered on the theme, "Until Death Do Us Part," but her boss reprimanded her for it. In recent years, a maniac has been targeting and killing couples on Valentine's Day, and Allie's ad could evoke dangerous associations with this gruesome violence. If the ad were published, the company could face a severe public relations crisis and be criticized for monetizing death and malicious marketing. Before Allie could explain, the boss called a new colleague, Jay. Upon seeing Jay, Allie recognized him as the man she had bumped into at the coffee shop that morning. He was the creative director of the New York branch and became a freelance creative in the advertising world at a young age. He earned a ringing title, Consumer Cupid, with a series of explosive romantic marketing cases. Jay's arrival heightened Allie's sense of urgency. After the meeting, Allie felt extremely down and began to scroll through the comments on social media, where negative reviews flooded in. Facing an avalanche of criticism, Allie felt unprecedented pressure. Jay then invited Allie to dinner, suggesting they could discuss advertising ideas. Allie gladly accepted the invitation, considering it was Valentine's Day. The restaurant had enhanced security measures in place. They even set up metal detectors at the entrance to prevent suspicious individuals from bringing in weapons. As Allie entered the restaurant, the metal detector suddenly went off. Frustrated, she opened her bag, and the staff retrieved a metal straw from inside. However, upon meeting, the two ended up arguing due to their differing views on love. The disagreement soured their evening and they parted ways. As Allie left the restaurant, she unexpectedly spotted her ex-boyfriend approaching with his current girlfriend. Without hesitating, she grabbed Jay and kissed him passionately. Jay was initially taken aback, but quickly adapted and went along with it.
Get killed, all right.
Later, Jay called a cab to take Allie home. Standing at her door, Allie fumbled for her keys but couldn't find them. Seeing this, Jay stepped in to help, finding out that she had a spare key under the doormat. But the problem was that they first had to get into the unit door, which was locked. The only option was to break the glass to unlock the door from the inside. As Allie prepared to do it herself, Jay stopped her and gestured for her to let him handle it. He wrapped his hand with a handkerchief and punched the glass, breaking it, but blood flowed from his hand. Reluctantly, Allie took him back inside to tend to his wound. Just as she opened the closet, the killer was hiding inside.
He is
In a split second, Jay lunged at the killer, and the two engaged in a fierce struggle. Allie grabbed a lamp and smashed it against the killer's head. Jay took the opportunity to pull Allie out of the room and prepared to take a taxi at the door to escape. However, the taxi driver was suddenly shot in the head by a short arrow. Allie trembled in fear at the horrifying scene. In panic, she frantically explained to the killer that she and Jay were not a couple at all, trying to defuse the situation. Yet the killer stood silently in the distance, staring at them. Just as Jay was secretly dialing the police, a sharp arrow flew out and shattered his phone. With no options left, they had no choice but to keep running. After a frantic sprint, they burst into an abandoned building, hoping to evade the killer. Catching their breath, just when they thought they were safe, the killer suddenly charged at them from the side. Without hesitation, Jay stepped in front of Allie to confront the killer, but he was ultimately no match for the opponent. Jay was kicked down and collapsed, losing consciousness. The killer turned around and chased Allie, and Allie ran desperately. She eventually escaped into an amusement park. She held her breath and hid behind the seats of the carousel, cautiously peeking out to look for the killer's whereabouts. At that moment, she spotted the killer leisurely sitting on a swing nearby, seemingly enjoying the deadly game. Quickly, she withdrew, attempting to suppress her fear. However, when she peeked out again, the killer had vanished. An ominous silence filled the air, and just then the carousel suddenly started up, the horses rotating slowly as the haunting music played softly. Allie was startled by this sudden turn of events and scrambled to her feet, but she was completely oblivious to the fact that the killer was silently standing right behind her. In the nick of time, Allie's instincts saved her. As the killer lunged at her, she swiftly dodged to the side and kicked the killer away. The killer picked up a knife and charged toward Allie once again. While trying to escape, Allie stumbled and fell to the ground. As the killer raised the knife, the sound of police sirens suddenly blared. Allie glanced back in shock, only to find that the killer had disappeared without a trace. Still shaken, Allie recounted her experience to the police and inquired about Jay's whereabouts. Just then, news came over the radio that the killer had been captured. Detectives Hobbs and Shaw arrived at the scene, engaging Allie in conversation to gather more information about the suspect. However, at that moment, Allie was most concerned about Jay's safety. When she tried to ask about him, Jay's reaction took her by surprise. He appeared angry, accusing Allie of abandoning him in their time of crisis. Allie explained that they had been forced to separate while fleeing for their lives, yet Jay dismissed her explanation. Meanwhile, the police presented a piece of the killer's clothing and a bloody weapon, indicating that these items had been found near Jay. The police began to suspect Jay's involvement in the case, even questioning the possibility of him being an accomplice. Shocked by such allegations, both Jay and Allie were taken aback. The police did not give them a chance to explain, and decided to take Jay back to the police station for further investigation. Jay insisted he was innocent, but Detective Shaw pointed out that his initials matched the letters on the ring found at the scene. They also mentioned that Jay had been in Boston in February 2023 and Philadelphia in February 2024, perfectly aligning with the times and locations of the killer's two murders. Jay admitted that he had indeed been to these cities because he was a freelancer and often had to travel for business. However, this answer could not dispel the police's doubts. Just then, the police station experienced a power outage, plunging the entire environment into darkness. Allie realized that the situation felt like something out of a horror film. Although Detective Shaw reassured her that it was likely just an ordinary blackout, Allie couldn't calm down. Terrified, she followed an officer in search of a flashlight.
No killers in here.
As soon as the police officer finished her words, she was stabbed by the killer behind her. In a critical moment, Allie quickly turned off the flashlight, attempting to evade the killer's pursuit. However, she hadn't anticipated that the killer was equipped with night vision goggles. The darkness wasn't a barrier for him, it was the perfect hunting ground. Allie screamed for help, and Detective Shaw rushed to stop her to figure out what was happening. As the killer approached, Detective Shaw drew his gun and fired. The officer guarding Jay rushed out to investigate the gunfire, but was killed by the killer around the corner. Allie ducked into a small dark room, which happened to be the interrogation room where Jay was held. Hearing her voice, Jay immediately called out for her, asking her to help find the keys to unlock his handcuffs. But Allie didn't respond, making Jay realize that she had abandoned him once again. At that moment, the interrogation room door slowly opened and the killer appeared. Jay was handcuffed to the table and could only desperately try to evade the killer's attacks by moving in circles. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out, breaking the tension in the room. Both the killer and Jay paused, their attention turning towards the source of the sound. Before long, the glass of the interrogation room shattered. Allie hadn't escaped. Instead, she had found a handgun. Under the pressure of her bullets, the killer quickly fled. Seizing the opportunity, Allie rushed into the room to free Jay from the handcuffs. Without stopping, the two men rushed out of the police station. As they prepared to share a passionate kiss, they saw the killer pursuing them again. Then the two of them got up and continued to run away, eventually arriving at an open-air cinema. A large crowd of couples was gathered, watching a film, and the killer arrived, scanning the area. Allie and Jay hid in a trailer, enjoying a brief moment of relaxation. But the killer did not stop his steps. He attacked couples in the open-air cinema without any pattern. Screams erupted, and the once sweet atmosphere of movie watching turned into a scene of bloody carnage. Panic ensued as people scattered in every direction. Seeing this, Jay instinctively wanted to use the chaos to get Allie to safety. However, at that moment, Allie stopped in her tracks.
And if he doesn't kill us, he's gonna keep killing people. We brought him here. We end it here.
The two were ready to fight side by side and face the killer together. Shouting out loud, they drew the killer's attention. The killer wrestled with Jay with double blades in his hands, and soon Jay's face was covered in blood. Just as the killer prepared to deliver a fatal blow to Jay, Allie picked up a heavy object and attacked the killer from behind. Enraged, the killer spun around and grabbed Allie by the throat, but Jay swiftly plunged a knife into the killer's chest. The cruel serial killer was finally defeated by the pair. After everything was over, Jay left his phone number, making it easier for Allie to contact him in the future. Since he had a flight to catch, Allie offered to take him to the airport. Back at home, Allie realized she had fallen for Jay. Encouraged by her best friend, she ran to the airport to stop Jay from leaving. At that moment, she received a mysterious phone call. On the line was Jay's terrified voice, calling out her name in desperation. At this time, the other party told Allie to go to the church in the suburbs alone, otherwise Jay would face death. They even threatened her not to contact the police, or the consequences would be even more severe. Afterward, she took a car to the church, only to find Jay bound in the center, with the killer standing behind him. The killer slowly removed his mask, revealing himself as David. He reminded Allie that they had met at the police station. David openly disclosed the identity of the person behind this, revealing that the killer's name was Eli. Allie assumed they were a pair, but David corrected her, stating that there were actually 3 of them involved in Heart Eyes. At that moment, Detective Shaw stepped out from the shadows. She mentioned an event from 10 years ago, claiming that she met David in an online chat room. Detective Shaw revealed that David had seen into her heart and understood her, just as she understood him. They both shared a love for hunting and killing, leading them to take turns playing with their prey. As for Eli, he was merely their fan. The initials on the ring were a reference to Officer Shaw's name. Allie didn't want to hear this nonsense. She said that she and Jay were not a couple at all, so why should she choose them? Detective Shaw explained that their original target had been the couple in the restaurant, which happened to be Allie's ex-boyfriend and his girlfriend. However, when they saw Allie kiss Jay, it changed their focus. David gave Allie a choice. He said there was a bullet in the gun next to her and she could either kill Jay or die herself. Now is a good time to put it to the test. If Allie really loves Jay, she will be willing to sacrifice herself to prove that love can conquer everything. But if she didn't love Jay, she should kill him to gain her freedom. This statement left Allie in emotional turmoil. David watched her coldly, waiting for her decision. Allie slowly picked up the gun, expressing her feelings in a whisper. She admitted that she had been avoiding love, scared it would ruin her life. But after this life-threatening ordeal, she realized her true feelings. She loved Jay. Upon hearing Allie's confession, Jay vehemently opposed her decision. His voice was filled with despair and fear as he pleaded with her not to do something foolish. Beside them, David and Detective Shaw reveled in the scene as if they were savoring a twisted love trial. Allie slowly pointed the gun at herself. Suddenly, a bullet pierced through Jay's shoulder but struck Detective Shaw in the abdomen. Taking advantage of the chaos, Allie quickly helped the wounded Jay, using all her strength to escape with him. However, an enraged David drew his weapon and began shooting at them wildly. Despite Detective Shaw being shot, she didn't halt her pursuit and even teamed up with David to block their escape route. They advanced menacingly, surrounding Allie and Jay. David yanked Jay away, forcefully slamming him to the ground, while Detective Shaw approached Allie with a sharp knife, ready to behead her. In a split second, Allie launched a counterattack. While Detective Shaw was losing her ability to attack due to pain, Allie broke free from her control. At the same time, Jay, who was held hostage by David, took out a crossbow arrow from David's body while David was not paying attention. With every bit of strength left, Jay drove the bolt deep into David's eye. David let out a heart-wrenching scream, struggling madly as he accidentally knocked over a candlestick behind him. The melted wax instantly spilled all over David's body, making his screams even more shrill. Seeing David's condition, Detective Shaw was consumed by rage. She charged at Allie, launching relentless attacks. In a moment of quick thinking, Allie pulled out a metal straw she always carried and thrust it directly into Detective Shaw's throat. Fast forward to a year later. Allie and Jay sat at the very location where the horrific events had unfolded, gazing lovingly into each other's eyes. Allie voiced her concerns, feeling that it might be a bit strange to have a date at such a place. However, Jay doesn't think so. He said this is where he really realized that he fell in love with Allie, and it has special symbolic significance. At this moment, Jay took out the key to the house and asked to live together. He hoped to start a new life with Allie. Their eyes met, and after surviving the harrowing ordeal, they finally solidified their feelings for one another.